You're listening to the Talkin' Boxing with Billy C show right here on ESPN New Hampshire. Glad you guys could join us, and we're glad we're part of your sports programming. Don't forget, if you're looking to get everyone, not just one person, everyone on your holiday gift list, make sure you get them a copy of my book. Tom Molyneux, From Bondage to Baddest Man on the Planet, is available right now, and I'm talking right now. Like, you can go there right now, Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, or you can pick up a signed copy by visiting the book club section up on BillyCBoxing.com. Well, it's time for
Blast from the Past. We shine the spotlight again on fighters from years past.
Shadow, top-ranking heavyweight. Joe Louis is the leading contender.
Joe Frazier with a left hook. Good right hand thrown by Foreman that time. Look at that left hook.
Belt that goes to Ray Mancini.
It's Blast from the Past on Talkin' Boxing.
And this week's Blast from the Past, which is being brought to us by KOFantasyBoxing.com, features a little-known guy. Unfortunately, not too many people have heard of him because he never got a world title shot, but he was a former British and Scottish champion, and his name, Bert Gilroy. And joining me to tell us all about Bert Gilroy is my man, Alex Perpali. What's up, Alex?
Good evening, Billy C. How are you doing?
Oh, not too bad, not too bad. How you doing? How you doing, man?
I'm pretty good.
Well,
things getting cold here in Connecticut, but
yeah. So tell me,
not too cold in the world of the Blast from the Past.
No, it's not. And we have a guy, Bert Gilroy, was here, a la the book. Man, tell us about this guy.
Yeah, unfortunately, I did not have that book, but I do. And you know, it's funny because when you sent me that first email, that was my immediate reaction, just to say, "Oh, Gilroy was here." And that's the title of the book. I was like, wow, that's pretty funny. This guy was, his actual name, his real name was Antonio Rea, R-E-A, and he was Italian. He was born May 10th, 1918 in, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this correctly, Airdrie, Scotland. And he fought out of Coatbridge, Scotland, which is, of course, in the United Kingdom. And he was 5 foot 8.5 tall, and he fought from middleweight, from Canelo's favorite weight, around 155, up to what today would be probably a cruiserweight, a little over, around 188, around that area. And that was part of the problem. He would sort of, in a way, if there was a guy who was cursed or jinxed, Bert Gilroy was probably one of them, because he was sort of locked out of the title picture because of timing in some degree, and also just plain, they were protecting these other fighters at the time, and he never got his just due. But he was one of those guys, Billy C., like we like to run into here on the Blast from the Past. This guy fought everybody.
Yeah, he fought everybody. Unfortunately, he didn't fight a lot of, or at least get the W's from a lot of the recognized names. I mean, like Freddie Mills, Marcel Cerdan are two opponents that most of our listeners, I'm sure, have heard of. But he came up short on those fights.
Exactly, right.
He fought
them, but he lost.
Right, and there was a lot, if people read the book, Bert Gilroy was here, the author of that book points out a lot of cases where, and the whole gist of the book is that Bert Gilroy was kind of taken advantage of by the system, that he was too good for his own good, so to speak, and he was not given those chances. Even when he was in somewhat of elimination bouts, they had already determined that the opponent was in the fight, win, lose, or draw, the fight that they were supposed to be fighting for. And I think the fluctuation in weight wasn't because of Bert Gilroy's inability to make weight. I think that he was forced to fight at that collection of weights just to stay busy, and that he was, man. This was a guy that fought a lot, Alex.
Yeah, he did fight a lot, and you're right. I mean, that's one of the things I think that he was sort of hobbled when he did get shots at great fighters. For example, Marcel Cerdan. he had to dry out so much to fight, to make the weight for that fight. And even when he had a weight advantage over Cerdan, he couldn't really use it because he had sapped himself in order to make the weight. So there were a lot of things like that seemed to be problems for him. But yeah, I mean, and again, Billy C., this is one of those guys, we're talking his career spanned from 1933 to 1950, and this was somebody who incredibly active. When you look at his early career, he is fighting once a month or so, and then even a little bit more than once a month. By 37, that's definitely more than, I don't have a count on that, but definitely more than once a month, and he's fighting almost exclusively in Glasgow, Scotland. So he got quite a local following, and you're right, it was that because he was forced to take fights where he was either the bigger guy fighting a really good little guy, or the smaller guy fighting a big guy. Kind of like a Jack Dillon, but of course not of the same skill, but in that range of weight classes, that same area, middleweight to light heavyweight. And sometimes, and we've talked about this before, when they call him light heavyweight, he could be 163, and that's the light heavyweight back in these days.
The thing that amazes me and really puts substance in the book by Mr. Glenn is that James Glenn wrote the book. I'll get to that at the end here when we're done. But, this Bert Gilroy was the number one contender, it seemed, forever, and how, we talk about in today's boxing world how, corrupt type things happen, and today's topics are a lot around that with the heavyweight division. Certainly things weren't different when you go back in time, even for these blasts, even though his last fight was 1950. You would have thought that a guy that was the number one ranked contender in the world, and we're not talking, yes, he was a Scottish and Brit champ, but we're talking about world rankings when there was only, 8 weight classes, and this guy was number one ranked for a long time and still was avoided. And no disrespect to Bert Gilroy, but I don't understand why. When you look at his dominating fights, a lot of them were against obscure opponents. And when he did step up to world-class opposition, he came up short, but yet he's still ranked at number one. Something just doesn't jive here.
Huh, yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know what the answer is to that. That's one of the things that I don't have the book, so I don't have like the whole story of what is available out there. But the things that that definitely seems to be the point that in the pieces that I've read, that it really was like it was almost like he just had a lot of bad luck. And how some guys just I guess the modern corollary is maybe I don't know, maybe you get Marlon Starling, for example, guys who maybe rub somebody the wrong way and then they're sort of blacklisted, or I don't know, but yeah, that was one of those problems. I'm not sure what the book goes into about it.
Well, it points out that in a 6 to 8 year span, 6 year span, he won 59 of 63 fights during that time. And that's pretty good, even if
that sure is.
Even if you're fighting your sister 60 times, to win all those times. And you could see why the ranking was so high. I just don't understand why people avoided him as much as they did. He did seem to fight mostly in the UK. I couldn't see if he fought ever in the United States. Did he?
Not that I saw. And I think that's one of the reasons why, in terms of articles, from newspaper articles, I wasn't able to find. There was only a couple, and it was when he fought, guys like Marcel Cerdan, and one of the Freddie Mills was the other one I got. Was Bruce Woodcock, and they were both, defeats. So yeah, I don't see a single one. They were all the UK that he fought. So yeah, it was. From what I read, it seemed like he was a stylist. He was an orthodox fighter. I don't know too much about his youth either. It does appear that he did get into World War II and broke his pelvis, and I guess was actually out of boxing for a whole year, and then returned to the sport. And yeah, the Marcel Cerdan fight came a few years in that second, after the broken pelvis.
Well, referee Eugene Henderson, who was actually the referee for the first Sugar Ray Robinson Randy Turpin fight, who was a well-known European referee, put out publications and stuff. He wrote an autobiography that was released in 1959, and he basically made a comment about just that. He said, when he was asked about Bert Gilroy, he said that the Coatbridge stylist was, in my opinion, the most unluckiest champion that ever was. He was affected by the war more than any other boxer that I knew. For just approaching his peak in 1939, he was never able to recapture it once he went into the services. If it weren't for the Second World War, Bert Gilroy would have been a world champion. So you're right. People forget the way the times were. Everybody, that's why they called it a world war. Everybody had to do their time, and this was during his prime, and maybe that would affected him more than some of the politics.
Oh yeah, and if you think about it, probably not only the timing of it, but also coming back from an injury like that, your pelvis, it probably greatly affected how you would throw punches, how you stand, your balance. So that could have been a major factor in that second portion. I'm calling it the second career only because there was a whole year out of the ring, and he had been scheduled. See, that's what does make it. According to Cyber Boxing Zone, he had been scheduled to fight Jock McAvoy, one of the fighters that was avoiding him, and that fight was canceled because of the broken pelvis. So it really, because it became septic. Billy C. I mean, that's one of those things. Remember we did Pancho Villa. He dies of an infected tooth. Back in these days, just getting a broken bone and having to go to the hospital, that's just the beginning of your potential problems.
Exactly.
Being in the hospital to kill you.
Exactly. You have a problem with your tooth and you don't make it out. I mean, things, you look at Harry Greb, he died of, getting secret surgery to his nose to repair his nose. And you think about, not getting into any issues, but all of the plastic surgeries that go on today is the norm. Somebody doesn't like their figure, they go in and get it fixed. And here's guys back in the history of this sport that didn't even make it off the operating table. So pretty crazy stuff. What's also crazy is that Bert Gilroy, for his last 10 professional fights, which what we see a lot of times with pros, at the end of their career, they clearly, they slide, and whether fighters end on a positive note or not, generally more often it's not, and it takes a good beating for them to realize that their career is over. But I don't know if that's really the case with Bert Gilroy, because his last 10 fights, he went 7 wins and 3 losses, losing to Stefan Olek, Kenny Shore, and Don Cockle. Don Cockle, I think, is a known name that he fought and came up short against as well. It seems like some of the bigger names that went on to gain some fame in the sport, he came up short against. Whether he was robbed with decisions or what is still to be seen.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to the fact that this guy, he definitely was somebody, and I could see why he is in the World Boxing Hall of Fame. The argument could be made that he's somebody who should be considered for the International Boxing Hall of Fame, only because of even though they're losses of the names on his record, and that's one of them there, Don Cockle. Especially in that latter half of his latter portion of his career, when Kako, he had fights with Roland Lastarza and Rocky Marciano.
Yep.
So yeah, I think that that's the thing about him, is that he was. If you look at his record, he's definitely a craftsman of the ring, and that's what we don't see those kind of guys today. He had fought many fights, so he's a veteran of many styles and many different looks. And when you think about it, that's really as many fights as Vlad Klitschko had. He was faced with a puzzle. That's one of the things about boxing, I guess. Every opponent is a puzzle. Sometimes you can't figure them out. And a good ring craftsman has the keys to figure anybody out. And I think that that's one of the things that you could say about Bert Gilroy, but he didn't have the master keys to get, like the keys that greats of the ring have. He's right on that cusp of being great. And I think that as you can see I guess next week we're getting the Hall of Fame names. Some years the class is such that a guy like a Bert Gilroy could squeak in if people consider him.
Well, here's a guy that had a long, successful career. You mentioned the injury in the military. He was, they questioned whether he was going to survive. They thought it was a layup that he would never fight again, and obviously he beat both of those odds. And as far as his style, he wasn't, although he got knockouts and had quite a bit of them, more than 40, to his credit. He was more of a guy that could adapt to, like you just said a little while ago, many styles. I mean, this guy was elusive in the ring. He was a good defensive fighter, despite being stopped several times. But, I think he was what they like to term a boxer puncher. Before that term came around, I think that would be the best way to describe him. So he's a guy that a lot of people never heard of, and probably the fact that he didn't come over on this side of the pond could have hurt him as well. But will always be a mystery to me how a guy could be ranked so high in so few weight classes and not get a world title shot. Seems crazy to me. And speaking about,
Lennox Lewis might call it politricks.
Yeah, that's. I think in Bert Gilroy's case, it was clearly politricks, and I'm going to give people some places to go to find out exactly what I mean. Some makings of what took place and what didn't took place, and some of the reasons behind the scenes. As soon as we're done, but who did you put him in with against in the title bout game?
Yes, I put him in against the number because he seemed to be a guy who fluctuated there in weight. I went with super middleweight and light heavyweight, and I put him in against the Billy C. Boxing ranked number 1 super middleweight, who is Arthur Abraham. And the first time they fought, Abraham comes up with a 5th round knockout at 102 of round number 5. Abraham knocks him out cold. When they fought 100 times, Gilroy comes up 33 wins, 61 defeats, 6 draws. Gilroy scored 2 KOs over Abraham, and in Abraham's 61 wins, he knocked Gilroy out 35 times. So now remember, if you look at his records, some of his better wins, I think, and better performances do seem to come at the heavier weights, at least light heavyweight. And that did seem to show in the game. Because next, I put him in against the monster crusher himself, Sergey Kovalev. When they fought the first time, Bert Gilroy won a majority decision. One card had 115-113, another had 116-112, and the third was 114 up all. And then when they fought 100 times, Kovalev did get the better of it. Gilroy had 27, but similar, 27 victories, 72 defeats, and 1 draw. So I don't know. I mean, I was encouraged when Gilroy won that first one, but I guess when you look at the overall 100 fights, he only won 27 out of 100, and he did have 8 KOs. And of course, Kovalev, of his 72 wins, knocked him into tomorrow 65 times.
Well, if the fight ever took place between him and Kovalev in today's world of boxing, there never would have been a rematch. He would have got the first win and ran off. But
That's right.
But anyway, Bert Gilroy, British and Scottish champion, longtime number 1 contender. His career record: 88 wins, 44 coming by knockout. He had 26 losses in which he was stopped 10 times. He had 8 draws. He fought 822 rounds with a 36% knockout ratio. Like Alex said, he is a member of the World Boxing Hall of Fame. Now, if you're interested in finding out a little more about Bert Gilroy, check out his Facebook page. You could do a search on Bert Gilroy and check it out. There's a lot of stuff there. There's articles and video and a lot of stuff by James Glenn, who wrote the book Bert Gilroy Was Here. So if you're looking to get a copy of that, drop me an email and I can hook you up with that. Billy at Talkin Boxing. That's TalkinBoxing.com. Bert Gilroy, our blast from the past this week. And as usual, Alex, good job there. I want to get your thoughts.